everybody. As she mentioned, my name is Nathan White. Thank you for allowing me to be here, and thanks for joining this presentation today. Before I will get started, I'm just going to say I really don't like talking at people. I like talking with people. So I'm going to be fairly conversational, and if anybody wants to interrupt me, this is a relatively small group. Let's have a conversation. I'm going to ask you some questions here in a little bit, but you don't have to wait. I guess I should start off with saying who I am. It's a different deck than I think I submitted. Well, why should you listen to me? My name's Nathan. I've been in the XR space for about 10 years, and I've been working with Meta for about 8 years almost. And what I do with Meta is I work in the policy team, Reality Labs policy, specifically working on AI wearables, and I have been working out on that role for the entire time that I've been at Meta. A lot of people ask, what does that mean? Our team shapes how Meta approaches privacy, safety, transparency, conclusion, and inclusion. Our goal is to make sure that every product we launch is consistent with regulator expectations so that the products are able to be enjoyed for the value that they bring and not subject to a bunch of regulator scrutiny about what are they and how are they using data. We want to get out of the way so that builders can build value. And what are we building? Well, at Meta, we're building, yeah, this is the wrong deck, cool. Hey, we're gonna do it live, it's fun. Oh, and it's also not showing up there. That's okay, we don't need slides. There's just a bunch of slides up there so lawyers can review what I said and make sure I don't get off script. So this is gonna scare them, don't worry. Okay, so at Meta, we're building a whole suite of AI wearables. We are building for personal super intelligence. And what is personal super intelligence? We think that we are going to be able to build AI that helps every individual in whatever it is that you want to do in life. And if you are deficient in certain areas or not as good as other people in certain areas, that technology feels amazing. It feels like a superpower, and it can give you cognitive amplification to make you be able to do whatever it is more that you want to do. But that is a very grand and broad vision. We know we can't do that alone. And we can't build products and services that we think are great for the world without bringing human beings and people along to design with us and to design in a way that society accepts and is excited. And you'll notice that I said we design with people, not just users in mind. We design with all humans in the loop because when you use these devices, you are not just the only person using the device. We are social creatures. We use technology around other people. And other people's comfort has a huge factor in what we want to do. And we don't always think about this because here we're at Augmented World Expo, and if you see somebody with some neat technology and holograms and waving their arms around, you're like, oh, that's cool, I want to go see what that is. But in the real world, people don't like that. If you're waving your arms around in the subway, you've got a bunch of people staring at you, and that doesn't feel very cool. Even if you're just doing subtle nods of waving your head around, you know, you've got a bunch of people looking at you, and everybody's looking at you wondering what you're doing. And some people feel really, really excited about that, but most people don't. Most people don't want to be the center of the attention. They want their technology to fade into the background. They want to feel socially safe using technology. And that is a difficulty that we have with these devices because they process the environment around us. And so that balance between what is good for the users and good for the people around you is not only a design question. It is a social question. It is a societal question. And no one company can do it alone. No one user can do it alone. It is something that evolves over time. We think about it as social norms. But we've seen over time how industry has developed these social norms and made people more comfortable. See, I guess we're using this now. What slide am I on? First of all, a little bit about Meta and AI wearables. We launched our first AI wearable in 2021 with EssilorLuxottica, famously known for the Ray-Ban and Oakley brands. Ray-Bans created that iconic Ray-Ban design with the ability to capture first-person point of view video and audio and listen to your favorite music and podcasts on the go. And I really want to just start there as being one of the most important things about getting this right. They're just great glasses. They look good, they feel good, and they do some extra stuff. I've got a boss I really like. He says, when you look good, you feel good. You feel good, you play good, you pay good, you play good, they pay good. That the way that you look and present yourself in society matters a lot to people, especially for a device that you wear on your face and is one of the first things that people see. So that design with EssilorLuxottica and that just being great glasses first is always our first and most important goal. Then being able to do cool stuff, be able to take a picture and send, hey, what is this to my wife? Or be able to listen to a podcast. My number one favorite thing I do with these glasses is I go to my kids' school events and I watch my kid and I listen to a podcast, and every once in a while I take a picture and I send it to grandma. And I get to look like the most engaged parent there. I don't have my head in my phone. I'm not reading a Kindle. I don't look up after the cheer and, oh, I missed it. I get to actually be present. And really, it's just technology that always exists, but in a great form factor that works and fits around my life. But increasingly, what I am experiencing, and I think what our entire industry is experiencing, is that it's also just wonderful for AI to be able to invite into my life and see and hear what I'm actually doing and help me do what I am trying to accomplish. That's different for different people. It shows up in different ways, but it's universally awesome. Not everybody knows what is awesome for them, and so they read and they hear stories before they often get to experience. And so we want to make sure that we are considering all people in our development and design, and we talk to people that may never buy our devices, may never use our devices, may not see our devices for a long time. But we want to understand how they feel so that when they are first exposed to people around it, it's not this weird thing, they're not confused, everybody feels comfortable about what's going on. One of the things that we heard before we launched is we're putting a camera in a place that people have not historically thought that there would be cameras. And people were concerned, what are people gonna do with that? Are they gonna take my picture when I don't know? Are they gonna embarrass me? Are they gonna do things? It's the other users that people were most concerned about. So, as you have probably seen with ours and other devices, we put a light on it for active capture so that when somebody takes a photo, people around know that something is happening. But we're moving into a different world. These can do things that are not just capture a photo for my benefit. They can now process the environment for AI. They can read the room. They can tell me what is happening in the room. They can tell me, describe the environment for me, which is incredibly helpful if you are blind or low vision. As they become increasingly helpful, they can do more and more things. And as you'll see in the expo, they are increasingly showing up in more and more different form factors for different features. I wish I could have grabbed Ori's slide where he had the picture of the football player and all the different sensors. All these different things that people are building that are doing different things. How are we going to make sure that society understands what those things are doing so that we can make sure that there is that social acceptance, that social comfort that allows all of us to thrive? You heard about this in Ori's speech. You heard this about Evan's speech. I think Ori called it the coffee shop problem, that we've just got to make sure that people are okay being around these. Evan talked about trust being the most important thing, that people need to understand and feel comfortable. They need to invite these devices in their life. I want to talk a little bit more about that, but first I'm going to pause and I'm going to talk about something else, almost entirely because I think this is really cool and I almost never get the chance to talk about it anywhere else. And that is, I talked about cameras. When we built the first devices, we heard from people concerned about user taking camera. And as we learned on how to make people comfortable with that evolving camera, we learned that we were in part of a giant history that has defined privacy for longer than anybody in this room has been alive. In fact, in 1988, Kodak developed a portable camera, the Brownie. And since that time, society has grappled with novel cameras, novel sensors, doing things and changing society and expectations. In 1988, they came out with the portable camera. It was portable by that standards, the huge thing with the giant light. And it was such an issue that in 1890, Louis Brandeis, with Samuel Warren, wrote The Right to Privacy and defined what he thought privacy meant for America. Apologize to my international friends, I'm American, most of my stories are gonna be about the United States. I do try to keep that in check, but for this story, please bear with me. So he wrote this article, The Right to Privacy. He later became a Supreme Court justice and later became the leader of the Supreme Court. And he interpreted the Fourth Amendment based on his concept of a right to privacy, which was defined in response to the development of a camera. And so throughout this history, we have seen that development. And it has taken some time for society to get used to. The story I love to tell. I think I've got a picture of this one. Maybe it'll be in here. In 1901, the New York Times wrote this amazing story about an interaction with President Theodore Roosevelt and a Kodak fiend. A teenage boy had got a camera, and he set up in front of a church that Roosevelt went to and took his picture when it came out. And I want to just read this article to you. As soon as Mr. Roosevelt reached the sidewalk, he saw the boy with his big box immediately, and raising his hand in a signal to the bicycle policeman standing near, said, "Stop that, stop that." The officer jumped in front of the camera, and the president strode almost at a run. Coming up on the boy, he shook his finger menacingly at him and declared, "You ought to be ashamed of yourself, trying to take a man's picture as he leaves a house of worship. It's a disgrace. You ought to be ashamed of yourself." Later, President Roosevelt banned public photography in public parks, and then later revoked it because people really like taking photos in public parks. And I really like this story because it shows a couple of different things. First of all, how society changes. Presidents really like getting their picture taken these days, especially coming out of churches. That is just such a change that a president would think that this was a private moment, and now we can't even imagine why you would not want that. Another, he called over the police officer and he tried to pass legislation to ban photography, but it wasn't actually legislations or regulations that changed behavior around photography. It was that interaction of him coming up of, I don't want this environment, this feeling, this does not seem right. I don't like this. It was a social interaction that led to social norms. And we've actually seen that throughout development. In 2000, we started to see cameras with built-in mobile phones with built-in cameras. The first one here, the Kyocera VP210, first sold in Japan and expanded. But by 2001, people were really worried about all these new cell phones that had cameras on them. And if you remember, there were some before that, they weren't widespread, but they were terrible cameras. But people got worried about these cameras of now everyone around me has a camera. Not just, the big Nikons hanging around your neck, but almost everyone you interact that has a cell phone is gonna have a camera. That had the same kind of privacy issues. People had to think, is somebody taking my picture? If I'm in a crowd, is somebody recording? How do I know? So the carriers understood that this was a privacy problem that they needed to overcome. They needed social acceptance for people to want cell phones. And so they had, in the meantime, they had these loud ch-ch sounds. And that ch-ch was very important because the number one concern people had back then was upskirt photos. That if I'm going upstairs, somebody's gonna take my photo, they've got these little devices, they can hold them anywhere, how am I gonna know about that? And so the address was this giant ch-ch sound that was very loud. And it's worth noting, that was not a law. There are very few jurisdictions in the world that ever regulated that. There are a couple that required that. But for the most part, that was a social acceptability feature so that people would understand. And once we all got used to cell phones, once you knew that everyone had a camera and you just expected it, those largely went away. There are still some places like movie theaters or when you go to get your passport or all sorts of places where they have rules against no photography. We don't want your cameras here, we don't want devices here. If you've ever tried to pull out your laptop at a pub in London, apparently that's a big, big no-no. I've gotten in trouble on that. Not a lot of UK folks, they're very anti-technology at the pub, at least the one I was in most recently. But again, all of that was social norm, social development, not regulation. But now we're moving into this new iteration where we in the XR space have become very, very comfortable with these devices. We are aware of them, but the general public is not. In some areas, I've noticed here in Long Beach, there's a whole lot of AI glasses. I'd really love to see it. But in Washington, D.C., where I live, they're still relatively uncommon. You see them, but they're just not as prolific. So if you're in an area where there's a lot of them, you're more comfortable, you're more experienced, you know what to look for, you're familiar with them. But in other areas where you may not have even been able to buy them or overseas where they're not even released, we haven't even begun that process of social acceptability and normalization. At some point, we're probably going to evolve. We're probably going to not want devices that have lights on them at all. We're all going to expect this kind of activity that is happening. We're going to think that it's happening on an AirPod if I can't see that you're wearing glasses, on a pendant if I can't see that you're wearing AirPods. We're going to expect this kind of behavior, but we're not there quite yet. And so at Meta, we have tried to help social norms adapt. We can do what we think is right, but ultimately this is a societal question. This is what people are comfortable with. So a couple things that we've done over the years. In 2022, we launched an EU awareness campaign on smart glasses. It wasn't a, aren't these devices great? Don't you want to buy them? It was a, these devices exist in the world now. You should be aware of them. These are ways that you can identify them. If you see somebody doing this, they might be adjusting, they might be taking a photo. Those are things that we will overcome. If you see a light, it's likely that a user is taking a photo. We explained to wearers how this light would come on. We've done all sorts of engagements around the world, and we've published responsible innovation principles and responsible use guides to demonstrate to people, you are responsible for this. You are going out in the world. We want you to have a good experience. We want you to have fun. But ultimately, if you are doing something that is socially unacceptable, you should be aware that just because you're hiding behind a pair of glasses doesn't mean that you're not doing something in society. That you should be responsible and thoughtful of the people around you so that we don't end up in a space where people are saying, no, 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 I just don't want to be around any of those things. And as part of this work, we've leveraged our XR Advisory Council. We have a Reality Labs Privacy Council. We work with XRA, who is just here on stage. And we've talked to a lot of external experts around the world. And one thing we have heard over and over and over again is the primary concern is that users taking my photo without my consent. So we've made sure that that light is noticeable when the user is taking a photo. But we do not signal when AI is passively paying attention to the environment, because that's not what people are worried about. And in fact, as we've done our research, we found that primary concern, absolutely number one primary concern, is what other people are doing. Not data centers somewhere, not closed caption cameras somewhere. It is what are other people doing. The next important thing is unobtrusive. The privacy of the person who is doing it also matters a lot. If I've got a light that comes on every time I Google something, it's going to be really embarrassing how little I know about things. That's not great for me, and if it makes me uncomfortable, and if it's always flashing, that makes the room uncomfortable. Always flashing, another, over-signaling. If it's coming on all the time, it doesn't mean anything. It's distracting and it's annoying. It's overloading that I, as a user, would have to know, okay, that's a red device, but it's on Apple, or that's a green device, but it's on OpenAI. It's too much cognitive overload. We need simple things that people can at a glance know what is going on. We need to consider social comfort, privacy, and interpretability. And so that is what I'm coming here today to talk to you guys about. We're moving into this new era where this light up here, you know what this light means. We've got kind of universal establishment on a lot of folks for the AI wearables. But as we move into recording rings that record audio and video for AI, for pendants, for things on your ear, for things that you wear, for things that you put in your pocket, we're moving into a new world where that paradigm is going to need to evolve and shift once again. And at Meta, we have a team of people who think very, very deeply about this, engage people around the world at it, and one of the reasons we come here to this group is to find out what you are thinking. You, as much as anybody in the world, have skin in this game to understand that we need to be acceptable for our industry to survive and thrive. And so I really want to hear from people who are in the industry, what kind of devices are you seeing in the world? What kind of reactions do you get when you are using them? Where do you think that we should be signaling? Where should we not be signaling? Should we move beyond signaling and leverage our folks over at XRA to just make it clear that we live in the AI world now? So I have been talking for a lot, and apparently I didn't even need slides anyway. So let's have a conversation. I talked for too much. We've got about 5-6 minutes. Maybe they'll let me go long. But want to hear, what are people building, and what do you think would be a good way for bystanders to know? Should they know?
I have other questions if you'll field some other questions.
Sure.
Great. Hey, Nathan. So as you know, Connect Safely, which I run, created the Bystanders guide to, I can't remember which generation of the Ray-Ban Meta, I think it was the first or second generation. And we talked a lot about this little light. But I think as you pointed out, when I go about my world and take pictures, most people have no idea what this is. I very rarely get any feedback, oh, you just took my picture. I actually rarely do use them to take pictures, but I've done that as an experiment. So unless I'm around fellow techies, it's really useless. Now, I don't know if that'll change over time or if we should regulate it. If every pair of glasses had it in the same place, maybe eventually people get to know it. But I'm trying to think of, this is not so much answering the question, but re-asking it. What can we do other than to wave your hand around and say, hey, I'm taking your picture, which I actually sometimes do. May I take your picture? But other than that, what can we do to protect people, especially from the folks that aren't, like me, going to try to be courteous?
Yeah. The balance that we have taken so far, as you're aware, Larry, is that the balance for these glasses, we think that we signal for active capture, and that tells people what they need. Is that all? Is there more? I'd like to think that we could do more. What is there that's reasonable, though? I once had somebody tell me that we should have a gas that emits a smell so that people who don't hear it will just know something is going on. And it's a really creative idea, but it's not a great consumer product. So there are limitations for what is realistically possible given the technical form factors. And that is my question for the community that we need to wrestle with before society gets confused and regulators come answering that question for us. Okay, several in the back.
I'm curious if one of the conversations you have internally is imagining how collective behavior changes when people, if and when people do assume that they're always being recorded, whether it's for data purposes or whether it's for somebody else's social media feed, but what that does in terms of that, in a dystopian term like a panopticon effect. But is that something that is kind of things that you try to think about? If this is all coming and we're all just gonna be recorded all the time and we're sort of gonna get used to it, then how does that change how we interact with each other or go through any kind of space?
Yeah, what is it? An object observed can't be or something? It's always in motion. We do think about it a lot. On the one hand, there is a little bit of an intimidating factor that if I come and say, I am recording you, like it's a little off-putting of, okay, what are you doing with it? Why are you recording? But on the other hand, there are all sorts of cameras and sensors that we just get used to and don't even think about and don't worry about and don't change our behavior at all. I'm looking around, I am sure there are probably cameras in this room for CCTV security for this building that nobody thinks twice about because they're aware of what they are, you understand what the value is for, and they don't impede you in any way. Same, I like to use the example of a GPS switch, that you are aware that, it could track you if you thought, oh, I've got this device that tracks me where I go in my location, everywhere I go in the entire world, should I not go anywhere? No, I use it to get directions because it helps me get there. I'm aware of what it does, but I understand what it is, I'm not afraid of it, and it provides me a value, so I just accept it. I think we're going to get there, but we're in this chasm where it's, I don't know what it is, I don't know what value it is, and I don't know if you're using it to help you see or if you're using it to take my picture and do something weird. And it's that information asymmetry that I think we as an industry need to get over to be able to get to some of the use cases that we all imagine.
Thank you.
Okay, let me try to be provocative here. So, Europe has the right to be forgotten. When you've been talking about intentionality when you're taking photos, but there are people in the background. And some of those people in the background could be people who have chosen to be forgotten, or they could be kids that no one wants to have photographed. Could the next step in camera development be a requirement that you have facial recognition that deletes people who want to be forgotten?
Yeah, regulation requiring facial recognition, that is provocative. I think it's really hard to build a camera that sucks. Like, would you take a camera that blurred out background photos to a wedding? Like, you want that. You want the background.
Extraction of objects and photos, it's all
Yeah.
visually processed.
Yeah, well, you might have an environment where you would know, I'm in an environment where there's background people that I should take out. But are you going to trust a technical control from dozens of different manufacturers? I think there are different ways to approach this. There's a human rights conference called RightsCon. I really love the way that they do it. We've all got blue lanyards here that they give you a choice of, it's like red, green, or blue. And if you are wearing a red lanyard, you can't take that person's photo. Anyone can't, if they see any of that photos, they'll send and request to take it down.
Don't go down that road, because the right to be forgotten is a directory.
Yeah.
So the facial recognition would tie into a directory. It's not as abstract as you're making it.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. So that you'd have some kind of centralized database for faces that would automatically be removed from photos when you take them. It's an interesting idea. I think if we don't, as an industry, figure out what we think is the best approach, that's the kind of thing that we're going to see from Europe. I think it would be technically very challenging, and ironically would be, I would say, privacy invasive, because then we would have to have a list of faces stored on every device of who you have to delete, and the fact that it would trigger would be just an alert that that person was spotted there. So it would be very difficult to enact that, but it is the kind of thing that a regulator would propose if society as a whole was feeling uncomfortable. And so we need to make sure that we have a consistent approach. Do we have time for one more, or are you going to kick me off?
Yeah, absolutely. You had mentioned that people are mostly concerned about active capture and not passive capture, and the basically live stream that's being captured, both for the user and the people around it. But I guess speaking, the question being to the actual user of the technology, my concern is more around the passive, always on, consistent AI feed. And when it comes to a right to privacy, like when that is so pervasive as these glasses become more and more used, how is that handled? Like, what is your opinion on that? What can we do about all of this data, this personal data that is being stored in these databases?
Yeah, I can only talk about what Meta has released and what decisions we have made for products that we have out in the market. So we don't have much of that passive. We have what we call live AI, which allows you to process about 30 minutes of video to be able to provide more of an ongoing experience for what you are doing. There are other products out there, and some of the inspiration is I get a lot of ads for these on Instagram, and you'll see them, that are very different, that are rings. There's one that slips on the back of your phone that records both sides of your phone conversation. There are ones that slip in here. There's Looky AI. I'm seeing probably 40 or 60 of these that I kind of want to buy just to test out. And I'm sure if I've seen that many, then there are a lot more. And so my prompt to the community is that's exactly what we need to figure out as a community. And we need people who are building these, not just to think of the immediate value of this would be really neat for the user, but to think of that ecosystem and how it impacts all of us and how we get to a place where everyone is okay with a personal AI device, because we just understand, okay, that person is using, I don't know, hearing aids that helps them hear, or, the blind low vision, it helps them see. It is just something that they are using to help with their memory and help with their processing, and it's not really about me. Thank you so much for letting me run a little over. I am sorry. And, one more. Got a QR code. If you'd like to give feedback, we would love to hear your feedback. And if you fill this out, you'll be enrolled. I think we're giving out 1 Meta Ray-Ban per day for people who fill this out. And you don't have to say nice things about me to be enrolled.